what happened during the 50s, 60s, and 70s will live on forever. The researcher showed us photos inside his book, Acres of Skin.
What you see in this bottom picture is the prototypic experiment that took place at Holmesburg. In some cases, it could just be very plain soap. In other cases, it could be a carcinogenic chemical. The inmates were never told.
Hornblum was a literacy instructor at the prison in the 1970s when he noticed many black prisoners in bad shape. He says UPenn dermatologist Albert Kligman led experiments on prisoners. The inmates were paid $1 a day, but it cost them their health. For his book, Hornblum spoke to Dr. Kligman before he died in 2010.
He thought what took place here was fine. According to his observation, the inmates were treated fairly.
Philadelphia shut down the experiments in 1974, 2 years after the Tuskegee syphilis experiment made national headlines. But the damage to the former inmates was already done.
They have lots of fears and regrets. They never really learned what they were testing or being injected with.
Almost a half century later, a survey shows 53% of blacks view medical scientists positively compared to whites and Hispanics.
I'm not surprised at all.
Dr. Ayla Stanford heads the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium, a group of predominantly black doctors who offer free testing in Philadelphia's low-income neighborhoods. Black communities in Philadelphia have a disproportionately high number of COVID cases and deaths. The consortium is working to break down the walls of mistrust among African Americans.
But you actually listen to what they're asking and you show them the testing kit. You demonstrate how it's going to be done.
Dr. Stanford says black doctors only make up 5% of all physicians in America. So educating white doctors about black health care is crucial.
You have to acknowledge what your own implicit biases are when you see a 6'5" African-American male come into your office.
In Holmesburg, Brandon Hudson, NBC 10 News.
I was born by the river, in a little tent, oh, and like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, and I know.
Talk about human rights in other places like China. We should not ignore how complicated that question can get. For this is a story about human rights, too. In this case, the human rights of a group of inmates at a prison in Philadelphia.
An investigation into the price of medical progress. In this case, experiments on prison inmates in Pennsylvania. Were inmates fully informed before they gave consent? Were proper medical rules followed? Or were the inmates caged guinea pigs, now suffering the health?
From the 1950s through the early 70s, thousands of inmates at Philadelphia's Holmesburg Prison were slathered with potions, doused with poisons, and dosed with hallucinogenic drugs.
And I go downtown. Some man keep asking me not to hang around. It's been a long...
Edward Anthony and Jesse Williams know these walls well. Both men spent time behind these grim 30-foot-high fieldstone walls, the ominous walls of Philadelphia's Holmesburg Prison. As young men in their teens and 20s, they served time here after being arrested for assorted crimes. Most of the men imprisoned here were either awaiting trial or serving county sentences of less than 2 years. In time, however, they and thousands of men and women like them would gradually come to feel that in addition to being sent to prison, they had been sentenced to science as well. For Edward Anthony and Jesse Williams, these gloomy cell blocks and barren cells harken back to a desperate and painful period in their lives, a period when they felt they had no other alternative than to become human guinea pigs, experimental lab rats used for the benefit and profit of others. Today, many of them are embarrassed by their time at Holmesburg and refuse to speak about the experiments they allowed themselves to take part in. Others are angry. They want to know how society, the prison system, as well as one of the elite institutions of higher learning in the country, could have used them for a wide array of scientific studies, experiments that ran the gamut from the relatively harmless to the truly dangerous.
I was used.
We've seen Holmesburg becoming a house of horror, and we've seen the doctors becoming Frankensteins. and we felt that, it had to be stopped before individuals come walking out of there backwards.
The former inmate test subjects were not alone in their search for answers. Others who were there at the time, or who subsequently examined the long history of the testing program, have their own questions and thoughts about what went on here.
Holmesburg was the Kmart of human research in post-war America. Anything that anybody wanted done on a human could be accomplished there. The doctors who ran the program, from what I've gathered, never said no to anyone, whether it was Dow Chemical or R.J. Reynolds or whether it was the CIA. If they wanted things tested on humans, it could be attained there. Dr. Kligman was an entrepreneur as much as he was a physician, and he was interested in, because of his own curiosity, of building a panoply of products and associations, and he was able to accomplish all of that during the 50s and 60s.
The Holmesburg situation really has a lot of features in common with the Tuskegee syphilis study, and the critical ones from my perspective are the lack of the freedom and capacity of the people involved who were subjected to the experiment to really exercise free judgment. This is independent of the question of how much information they got. You start with the situation that the people are in. In Tuskegee, they were poor, totally deprived of any economic opportunities, many of them uneducated. In the Holmesburg situation, we have similar problems, and maybe even more exacerbated in terms of freedom, obviously, because they didn't have the capacity to even move about or decide when to go to the bathroom on their own. So in that regard, we're starting out with people who are vulnerable, a large population of people who are vulnerable, who are poor for the most part, and who are uneducated.
I had heard rumors, as everybody did who was out there, of what had gone on in times past. And some people who were acolytes of Kligman had worked there as residents, some of them in California, at the University of California in San Francisco, had been said to have done horrendous experiments, surgical procedures that were really horrific.
Tests they now believe went too far.
They cut my back, cut some pieces out, layers of skin.
They had a test back then where they were burning guys with radiation.
I was on the LSD test.
With funding from major pharmaceutical companies, among others, Holmesburg had become a testing ground for experimental medical products and procedures.
I had took the toothpaste test in the mid-60s at a very early age. I lost all of my teeth by the time I was 23 years old.
This is where the experiments were generally performed.
The prison eventually closed, and what went on there was nearly forgotten. But Alan Hornblum, a Temple University professor who worked at the prison in the early 70s, never forgot what he saw.
Since the publication of the book, Acres of Skin, that first revealed the true extent of the Holmesburg medical experiments in 1998 and the intense media interest in the book's revelations, the former test subjects have formed their own organization, the Experimentation Survivors. The group, now several hundred strong, has provided counseling to those members in need, lectured at several college forums about their days at Holmesburg, initiated a series of protest demonstrations against those they believe orchestrated the experiments, and testified at several state and local investigative hearings. In addition, they filed a federal lawsuit against a prominent dermatologist, an Ivy League university, and the city of Philadelphia. They are determined to finally attain justice.
Post-war America was a hotbed of human experimentation in American prisons. Everything from flash burn studies in Virginia to testicular irradiation studies in Oregon and Washington State, live cancer cell injections in Ohio State Penitentiary. At least half the states had one prison that was doing experimentation. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, had 9 or 10, Holmesburg being the greatest example of this. Holmesburg was really a department store of opportunity. Anything could be done that a corporate or private entity was interested in.
Possible death or liberty. This is the risk 10 convicts are volunteering to take in the fight against sleeping sickness.
We're doing this for the sake of humanity.
From the early 20th century, when they were used for pellagra and testicular transplant experiments, to a half-century later, when they were incorporated in cancer and psychotropic drug studies, prisoners as test subjects were a desired commodity.
The test begins. In glass tubes with gauze at the ends are mosquitoes which were fed on victims of the St. Louis epidemic. Will their bite affect these men? That is science's question.
Can you feel a mosquito biting?
Yes, ma'am.
In response to the fiendish acts committed by Nazi doctors on concentration camp prisoners during the Second World War, the United States put 23 German physicians and medical administrators on trial for their acts. After 7 doctors had been sentenced to death, and many others to lengthy prison terms, the American jurist handed down a code of conduct for research physicians to ensure that such inhuman acts in the name of science would never happen again. The Nuremberg Code's first principle not only requires the voluntary consent of the test subject, but also states the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision.
It was America that tried the Nazis, harangued them about their practices, and finally executed 7 of them by hanging, and many others were given long prison sentences. But oddly enough, America was very reluctant to buy into the Nuremberg Code. In the 50s and 60s was really the golden age of human research, and some fairly nasty, unsavory things were done in America on retarded children, on senior citizens, on all sorts of institutionalized populations, including prisoners.
I think that, James Jones, when he did his book on bad blood, and there was an interview done with some of the doctors who had involved themselves in that experiment, and they were asked, do you see anything wrong with it? And they responded, no, I don't see anything wrong with what we did. I think really provokes a lot of thought, because one has to wonder how the individuals were able to act and yet distinguish themselves from what was going on. If you remember, Tuskegee was going on before and after the Nuremberg trials. And so the response that was given by one of the experimenters was, well, they were Nazis. And to that extent, in his mind, what he was suggesting is that they couldn't be trusted, and we can. And so there is a blind spot that occurs in America when people look on the outside and then compare the same situation on the inside and don't see the similarities. And again, I think it comes back to my basic principle that if you don't see the individuals, even within America, as being of equal human status, then you are able in your own mind to say what we're doing is different. Because if you look at the Nazis, they were identifying evil people who were the experimenters. They said, we're good people. What's left out is who are the victims and what are the justifications for exposing the victims to the risk, and they are the same.
It was in the early 1950s, and Holmesburg Prison was forced to deal with another in a recurring series of outbreaks of athlete's foot. The prison, a vestige of the late 19th century, was underfunded, unsanitary, and overcrowded. In an effort to grapple with the fungus problem, prison medical personnel contacted a young dermatology professor at the University of Pennsylvania who had recently published a series of articles on the subject. The physician, Albert M. Kligman, had previously earned a PhD in mycology and specialized in fungi. Desiring to be helpful, Kligman visited the maximum security institution in northeast Philadelphia. Upon entering the institution and its large rotunda, Kligman witnessed hundreds of aimless, seemingly hopeless prisoners. The impact of seeing so many destitute, incarcerated men was nothing short of startling. As Kligman later admittedly said of the incident, he felt like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time. The enterprising researcher realized he had come upon something truly unusual, a colony under perfect controlled conditions. Awestruck, but quick to size up the situation, Dr. Kligman recognized that large numbers of semi-illiterate men being warehoused for long periods of time could be of enormous value. the Penn researcher had discovered acres of skin. It wasn't long before Dr. Kligman approached prison superintendent Frederick Baldy, requesting permission to perform some rudimentary clinical experiments on the prisoners. Baldy, a physician himself, thought the clinical studies a novel idea that might benefit the prisoners as well as the university, and agreed to allow Kligman to perform his studies. The agreement between the University of Pennsylvania professor and the city prison boss was sealed with a handshake. The result would be one of the largest human experimentation factories in post-war America. For the next quarter century, more inmates would take part in more scientific experiments at the prison than just about any other research facility in the country. Dr. Kligman embarked on a wide array of dermatologic studies. His use of imprisoned Philadelphians was not altogether surprising for an ambitious researcher who had already incorporated retarded children in his scientific studies. In the late 1940s, for example, Kligman had used children at the Vineyard and Woodbine institutions for the feeble-minded in South Jersey for experiments with poison ivy and various forms of fungus. Some of these experiments were carried over to the prison population. The poison ivy experiments, for example, garnered Kligman national media attention and a 3-page spread in a 1955 issue of Life magazine. Referred to as the poison ivy picker of Pennypack Park, Kligman was portrayed as an innovative researcher utilizing the nation's wealth of institutionalized troublemakers for the public good. Photographs showed Kligman collecting the dreaded plant in a nearby park and prisoners lining up to be slathered with poison ivy. Possessed with a highly inquisitive and lively mind, Dr. Kligman explored a great variety of subjects. Some were quite innocent, and others were more daring, and held a degree of risk to the inmate subjects. Some experiments inoculated scores of prisoners in their face, scalp, and even their penis with various viruses like wart virus and herpes simplex. Others infected prisoners with enormous quantities of ringworm. Prisoners received the sum $1 or $2 a day for their participation. This was a princely sum compared to the meager rewards for one of the scarce prison jobs that earned the inmate only a quarter a day.
Inmates participated not because they were patriotic, not because they wanted to advance science. They were interested in gaining some money. These men were desperate, and they were all interested in having money, just as you are on the street.
A lot of guys in Holmesburg Prison was paying heavy prices because they had no money, and money at that time was cigarettes. Some guys were being raped, some guys were being stabbed, and some guys were being brutally treated because they didn't have money. So I knew that I did need money in places such as Holmesburg. 10 cents a day, 25 cents a day at tops. And the experiments paid, the less they would pay is like $1 for some tests, and some experiments that went on paid other things. I still believe what had happened with all the experiments I was on, they gave us chicken fee because we were in need for money. This was a well put together project where they saw the situation, they examined it, they studied it, and they knew what to do to get top performance from all of us. So I think what they did was they played us, and they played us well.
For the most part, they were indigent people, poor people, and me too. And nobody sent us $50 or $100 a week to be in jail. No. When we heard about the test, when I heard about it, I was really elated. I was glad.
If the inmate population was enticed by the economic prospects of the prison research, the nation's pharmaceutical community was equally enamored by the prospect of doing business behind bars. The post-war years were a period of tremendous growth for drug companies, and test subjects were crucial to their business. Vulnerable, institutionalized populations such as orphans, the retarded, and those in hospitals were an attractive commodity to the nation's scientific community. Confined, unquestioning, and inexpensive, prison inmates were particularly desirable and soon became the guinea pigs of choice. As one scholar has said of the relaxed ethical atmosphere, it was the Gilded Age of research. It didn't take the nation's pharmaceutical community very long to learn of Dr. Kligman's human research studies. The prospect of working with a respected Ivy League researcher who had unlimited access to a confined test population made for a very appealing alliance. Gradually, pharmaceutical giants like SmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Carter Wallace came to Dr. Kligman requesting clinical trials be performed at the prison. They offered a handsome financial reward for the dermatology professor's cooperation. Rarely did Kligman turn them down. Within a short period of time, every commercial product, from deodorants and detergents to diet drinks and mouthwash, were being tested on inmates. Many of the studies, such as those dealing with toothpaste and dandruff, were relatively tame. Others, however, such as Phase 1 pharmaceutical testing, were considerably more dangerous.
Well, as far as strains, I went over there one morning and I seen a ladder, steps. You walk up, and at the top of the steps were a toilet seat, and a camera was behind it. I asked him, what is this for? He's taking pictures of a guy defecating. You know what I mean? And then I come over there another time, and here's this guy, and he take his shirt off, and he's growing breasts like a woman. And what kind of test is this? It's a hormone test, where this guy's whole nature is turning around from them injecting hormones in.
The experiment that I got involved in was an experiment for athletes' feet. This experiment was supposed to be an athlete's foot preventive. All right, so they approached me and they told me that I'd be wearing this powder, which was some type of preventive for athletes' feet, for a week, and I'd receive $50 for this. Well, $50 sounded good at the time. What this experiment involved, I was brought to it's a cell that we use for all the other experiments. A plastic bag was wrapped around my right foot up to a little bit below my knee. Then the powder was dumped into the bag. Okay, now at the top, a little bit below the knee, duct tape was wrapped around the leg. Now I had to wear this bag with the powder for a full week. When I bathed, showered, went to chow, did any kind of exercise, this bag had to stay on, or else I wouldn't got paid for it. Well, a week went by, was taken back to the same room, and the attendants removed the bag, and there was about 3 of us in the room when they removed. There's 3 people involved in the same test. Well, the odor was so excruciating that we almost passed out. We had to walk out of this room just to catch our air, just to catch the breath. Now, as far as my leg, it was all shriveled up. I guess lack of moisture or too much moisture, whatever it was all white, it was all shriveled. Got money was put on the books, and that was it, I thought. Next day, I had no problem, but the second day when I woke up, I got stepped out of my bunk, tried to stand up, and I fell flat on my face. Turned out that the leg that had the experiment, a nerve was severed in the right leg. After that experiment, I had my fill of their experiments. That was the last experiment I participated in, and that's the last experiment I've ever participated in.
They took my lip and they put it on my arm, and they took my arm and they put it in my lip.
I come over there where they have a dandruff test, you know, where they rub something on your chest, all the guys' hair fall out. Then they put something on their head, and like you had a bad grade of hair, you would be walking around, when the hair grew back, if you were black, you would have hair like a European. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. You know, toothpaste test, where guys was using the toothpaste, next thing you know, they in the mess hall and their teeth just falling out.
I was told not to drink of that test. Don't take any liquids, because those that drank it there's a yellow line on the center of Holmesburg. It's called the center, where you can stand and look down all the blocks. It's a yellow line, and they would open the door and you walked out, even if you had a visit or you had to go to the infirmary or wherever. You couldn't cross that line. If you did, you would get beat up and put in the hole. Well, they had a pay me no mind list. They had all these guys that was drinking this liquid stuff. They would walk around, they would actually and literally walk into the wall.
To those guys, it was a way to make a buck. These were experiments being done by, I guess, University of Pennsylvania. These were experiments, and they made them sound very palatable. Shampoo experiments, toothpaste experiments, trying them out on people. And so prisoners were first. It seemed real non-threatening, the way that was explained. But I seen guys come back to the block walking like zombies with the big paper cups attached to their inner arms and in their legs. And later I saw under those cups silver dollar-sized scars. These were either from chemicals they put on them or radiation. I wasn't sure which, but they were ugly silver dollar-sized scars. And I seen guys 20, 30 years later on the street, they still had those scars.
Though the number and variety of medical experiments performed at Holmesburg continued to grow, Kligman's research empire was relatively unfettered by government or corporate strictures. The only hint of oversight came in 1966 when a study of DMSO came to light. Kligman orchestrated a clinical study of the drug at Holmesburg against the government's wishes. A lengthy two-part article on the DMSO experiment that appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association only made the matter worse. A subsequent FDA investigation of Dr. Kligman's prison research program found numerous discrepancies and resulted in his disqualification as an authorized researcher of investigational new drugs. The stiff governmental sanction, which had only occurred once before, mobilized Kligman and his defenders. They lobbied the government, arguing the great harm that would be done by closing the Holmesburg research program, and they pleaded for another chance. Surprisingly, the government relented and gave Kligman back his lucrative status as an investigator of new drugs. Part of his penance was his public admission that the DMSO experiment was in error. It was during this period and in subsequent years that Kligman would embark on some of his most dangerous experiments. Documents show he contacted numerous corporate and government entities to test an array of dangerous substances. Dioxin for Dow Chemical, tobacco for R.J. Reynolds, chemical warfare agents for the Army, and his own radioactive isotope studies. Those were just some of the experiments initiated by the Penn researcher at Holmesburg. In the dioxin studies, the first time the powerful carcinogen had ever been applied to human beings, Kligman exposed dozens of prisoners to initially modest but increasing levels of the chemical according to the Dow protocol. When those levels proved unsatisfactory, Kligman altered the protocol and increased the dosage 468 times, guaranteeing a positive reaction. Dow officials were stunned by this and severed their relationship with him, but a large array of either unknowing or uncaring corporate and government entities continued to seek him out for clinical research projects, and Holmesburg remained a test site. The mid and late 1960s became one of his most fruitful and economically rewarding periods.
The Army experimentation study was a harsh story to tell because these guys took you into a trailer that sat in back of the prison, and they gave you a drug. At that particular time, I had no dealings with narcotics at all. And I do remember that they gave me something that I didn't know where I was. In fact, the group had found me in the yard looking up at the sky, not knowing where I was. When they gave me this drug that they gave me, it took effect to me, and I began to do other things that I would normally do, such as stick-ups and other things. And later, I became addicted to drugs, and I believe it had a lot to do with what they had given me. The drug was really something because I had a different, my fuse began to be short. I had a short fuse where before I had good tolerance. But the drug now had me on a short fuse thing. I became violent in some cases. I believe it was due to the experiments. Yes, sir.
Well, I started having second thoughts about the test when I heard about individuals going off on the cell blocks and going off in the trailers where the United States Army was conducting all kinds of drug tests and whatnot. They put 2 trailers behind Holmesburg Prison, behind H Block, and they had inmates living in those trailers for days at a time, experimenting with them with all sorts of drugs. And some inmates actually snapped, went off. And that's when we began to really look at these studies. In the very beginning, they were relatively simple. They were like mild lotion studies and things of that sort, things that wasn't life-threatening. And then it got on to become, it went on to become more inhumane and more barbaric. So what happened was, out of concern, we just started talking about it was time for them to, go back to what it was or either stop it.
The experience of being an incarcerated human guinea pig for an assortment of academic, corporate, and government clinical studies left the test subjects with a decidedly negative view of Dr. Kligman, as well as the University of Pennsylvania and the medical establishment in general. Doctors and hospitals could no longer be trusted. While many seemed to profit from the research, particularly the physicians and the high-powered institutions they work for, all the test subjects have to show for it is scars and bad memories. Their moral outrage with the people who use them remains to this day.
These were the brokest of broke people, okay? And so when people ended up in Holmesburg, this was the poor and the working class, petty thieves, what have you, for the most part, the largest part of the population. I think it says that ethically and morally they're bankrupt. That's what it says. It says if you want to make money and continue the never-ending expansion of universities, if this is how far they'll go to do that, then it shows that they're ethically and morally bankrupt.
So I never really trusted doctors from that day on.
I believe in science, but I don't believe in them taking a person that's healthy and giving him a disease to try to find out a cure when you have enough people running around with these illnesses. And this is exactly what he was doing to us in these jails. He was taking healthy people, because when I went there, I had nothing wrong with me. I had a perfect bill of health. I came out, I'm totally deteriorated right now today. The doctors, I'm going to the doctors, my HMO, I done spent $1 million with them, and they ain't gave me no diagnosis as far as my gastrointestinal problem, and why is my joints deteriorating.
But I really saw it as a very class thing with an additional racist element.
I feel as though I was treated as a human guinea pig, to perform research for the University of Pennsylvania and Dr. Kligman to get rich by, in which he did. Me and all the other inmates, the ones that died, and the ones that's living right now today. Most of the guys that I know are afraid of doctors.
They ruined my life. My leg not only was severed, but it's ugly. My children, when they were growing up, I couldn't go out onto the beach with them. I didn't want to draw attention to myself and to my children. I don't trust them. These were doctors that were supposed to be helping me. Instead of helping me, they hurt me. And why did they hurt me? For a personal gain is what it boiled down to. For their personal gain, I got hurt.
I just can't understand how someone in America could act like he's over in Auschwitz somewhere in World War II. How could he dispense this type of toxic poison into human being? I never met the gentleman, but I'll tell you something, he is real sick. They say he's rich, but he's rich at our expense. You understand? He needs to see us. He needs to look at what he did to us. You understand? I don't want to punch him in his mouth or anything like that, but I do want to go in his pocket. He's got millions, and he's got the nerve to fight us, Listen, it's not just Holmesburg. This was going on nationwide, and one in particular was in Tuskegee. So, you know, it was going on. How could they do that? They take poor people, indigent people, and just ignorant people, illiterate people, and just do anything they want.
In their defense, Dr. Kligman and the University of Pennsylvania have argued that they didn't do anything particularly unusual. They were right to step in with other clinical researchers and scientific institutions doing such work at the time.
It reinforces the feelings that many people have that they can't trust the medical profession. They particularly can't trust white doctors. They can't trust white health professionals because they don't believe that they have their best interests in mind. And that's not simply paranoia, because when one goes to a doctor or one goes to a hospital, you do not divorce all the other experiences that you've had in life. So to the extent that you've been interacting in a society which makes you distrustful generally, whether or not it's going to get a job or to get into school, and then you learn that not only can you not be comfortable in trusting people in those regards, but the doctor, whom you would expect to be able to trust to have your interests, has been guilty of blatant abuses. And just as when we look at Tuskegee, one wants to say, well, maybe this has nothing to do with race. I mean, you keep hoping that. The reality is that when you get these repeated examples where the people being exposed in disrespect are African Americans, then that travels throughout the community. And that's passed on from generation to generation, from community to community. And we've got to stop that. The whole profession gets out of step with fundamental human international values is something that should be touted as a problem, not as a defense.
There is no question about it, because the evidence is incontrovertible. What was done under the auspices of the University of Pennsylvania was a perversion of what medicine is supposed to be. And if that doesn't happen in historical perspective, then it means that American medicine has become bankrupt. Well, there is no question that Al Kligman was a model for many trainees at the University of Pennsylvania. And at first, I think for most, a positive one, because he was engaged in teaching, although his teaching was, like almost everything else, extraordinarily superficial. No depth, no preparation really, and largely anecdotal, but entertaining. And so there was, at first, a certain inclination to model oneself after Kligman. By the time I left the University of Pennsylvania to go to Boston, I had determined for myself that Kligman was the antithesis of what I wanted to be professionally and personally. And so he became an extraordinary negative model for me. For many of my colleagues, however, contemporaries, and for those who went before me and for some after, Kligman became a model for making money in medicine by pandering to pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies, and by, in some ways, extracting huge sums from them by giving them what they wanted to hear and without doing work in a serious way, basically operating and manipulating. And I think that in this respect, his legacy is also less than what it might have been by a lot.
There are, however, some observers who don't share that assessment. Moreover, most of the former test subjects believe they are still owed something. The Holmesburg Prison medical experiments are gradually taking their rightful place next to Tuskegee, Fernald, Willowbrook, and the other infamous names in the pantheon of unethical human experimentation in America. But for the men and women who endured these clinical trials at the county prison in Philadelphia, the fears, doubts, and concerns remain. In short, their struggle continues.
Some buddies of mine, we were talking about this in the cell over Holmesburg, and said, you know what, I'm sorry that I got on that, you know, because it meant 30, 40 years from now, there may be some repercussions behind this. And now I see what they mean, because the side that they injected the stuff on me is the side that I have cancer. I have cancer in my brain, as a result of it. I have cancer in my bone, and I cannot, my functioning is limited, and I was a healthy young man. Dr. Kligman, I can't stand him. To me, he violated everybody that was there with these experiments, because he knew what he was doing to the inmates over there. And the city knew what was going on over there. Everyone had got financial gains from this. They made millions of dollars off of this. We found out later what was going on. And we're deeply hurt behind that, because we ain't get a dime. We got a stipend, for what they subjected us to. It should be punished, And as I think about it, I mean, when me and my son, we went to the cancer clinic, and they told me I had brain cancer, and they couldn't give me a time frame as to how long I may have here, He started crying, I started crying. My mother, she started crying. She's 80 years old, I mean, it's been rough. They should compensate. They haven't even acknowledged no one about compensating anybody. Kligman, he living high off the hog. He's a millionaire. We poor. Ain't got a dime.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, and like the river I've been running.